teachers. What was the worst thing a substitute teacher did while you were gone? Left my perfectly prepped and neat desk an absolute disaster. Did not follow the lesson plan and took my gel pens. Accused a student of stealing something that the aide had put away. This was a class that contained some pretty rough students, including one suspended multiple times for fighting and some gang members. She decided to go after a sweet, petite girl that never caused trouble and was generally popular with her classmates. This set off the entire class, which is when the sub went ballistic and started wildly throwing accusations and yelling at said students. Security eventually got called and took several students out. My first clue was when the sub got my cell number from the staff directory and went off for 20+ minutes about how bad my students had been. This was followed up with an extremely long email and a 2-page written note on my desk, plus a concerned note from the administrator about not having appropriate sub plans. She didn't follow them in the first place and decided to throw me under the bus. The next morning when I arrived at school, the students were waiting for me at the door. Once I got them calmed down enough to tell their side of the story, we had a discussion on how they could have handled the situation differently. I promised them never to get that up again. On a related note, I had a good relationship with said rough children because I treated them with respect and fairness. They usually behaved for me. Gave out snacks I bought with my own money that I kept for kids who stayed after to get tutoring. Threw out a broken electric pencil sharpener that kids broke in front of her, which again, I bought with my own money and couldn't get replaced by the company because I had no product to send back. I still don't have a sharpener for my room. Let the kids go through my things in my cabinets and desk. Lost a bunch of stuff that way. I was a teacher's assistant while in college. A teacher and I took a week-long workshop and had a sub. The worst thing she did, not letting the kids go potty. It was in kindergarten and she said all the kids going to bathroom were interrupting the class. One girl wet herself. School policy was if kids under a certain age had an accident, the nurse would give them a pull-up, basically a diaper, to wear. The substitute proceeded to make fun of the girl for wear a diaper, calling her baby and such. The little girl ended facing repercussions at home too. This was devastating to hear about. I would occasionally give out Starbursts to my 4th graders. Itch ate all the pink ones. I came back after being gone one day and my students told me the substitute teacher flipped over tables in a rage and was escorted from the building by a cop. What actually happened is that the sub left the room to take a 20-minute phone call and the kids thought it would be funny to flip the tables over. The substitutes then had to flip the tables right side up while yelling at the kids. Then, during lunch, my special ed co-teacher came into my room to set up and caught the sub making out with a student. Turns out she was 18 to his 25 and the 20-minute phone call was to set up the lunch meeting. The principal then had him escorted from the building by the resource officer. This is why I say having a sub is more work than just coming into school my damn self. Edit. Wrong version of principal. When I was a substitute, I got a lot of requested jobs because the substitute pool was poor. One such example given to me was a substitute who would just go to sleep. I barely believed it. Once I was teaching full-time, I had a sub come in for a day. When I got back my students told me that he told them to leave him alone, sat down, and went to sleep. I believed it then. Didn't do anything to the kids, per se, but told the kids that the reason I was out was because my mom was having breast cancer surgery. I teach K5 and I specifically didn't tell the kids because I didn't want them to worry. So, when I came back, I had a bunch of kids come up to me asking about my mom, which was so sweet, but not something the kids should have had to worry about. Rearranged my room, not in a move student A away from student B and put her by student C way, in a move the giant rug over to the opposite corner of the room, and completely change the layout of student desks, and rearrange a bookshelf way. There was a harpsichord in the front of the classroom used both for demonstration and performance. Not knowing what he was doing, the sub tried to tune 3 notes that had gone mildly out of tune while I was away. He managed to break the strings on all 3 notes and left a message inside reading, "Sorry about that, comma." Lost more than half of my textbooks that I purchased myself, as well as textbooks that were school property. Administration just shrugged at this. until they found out the textbooks belonging to the school were around $120 each. Also lost all the book assignments of 4 classes I asked him to collect so I could correct those at home. Kinda sucked for the students who did put a lot of work on it and didn't have digital copies. Also didn't teach anything that I asked him to, because he didn't really like the subject matter. Also didn't bother grading. When I checked the grades he had given out, there was only 1 grade and everyone was given 8/10. Even students that didn't take my class. Not a teacher but the sub made the handicapped classmate who has muscle, joint and vision complications go grab his textbook from his home room. He's not completely helpless but when it comes to heavy things, he needs help. Classmate's homeroom was halfway across campus and the required book consists of 5 large text volumes because they're specifically made for his poor vision. He can't wear glasses either due to complications. I offered to help because I'm usually the one that goes and grabs it for him during normal class but the sub yelled at me saying he knows my kind and I'm just trying to get out of class. Sub told me he's not there to play games and for me to quit it before he sends me off to the principal's office. Needless to say the entire class was shocked. Classmate came back with another student from the homeroom requesting that next time the sub send someone else to grab the books because my classmate can't carry it by himself. When my usual teacher came back we requested the sub not return because of what he said to us and did to classmate. My teacher wrote an email to the principal about it and that was the end of that. This happened to my colleague, but I was the classroom next door. My colleague was showing Clash of the Titans at the end of the year after a unit on ancient Greece. There is mild nudity at the beginning and the end of the movie, but they were in the middle of the movie so there shouldn't have been an issue. He left the video paused at the right spot. We still had VCRs like 10 years ago when this happened, but the sub somehow managed to show both the nudity at the beginning and the end of the movie. The nudity scenes were hours apart and the class was only 40 minutes. Then, the sub wrote an email to the principal about how my colleague made him show nudity. She let the kids run wild and do whatever they wanted. First graders. I was out because my dad died. Thank God my team realized what happened and all pulled together and cleaned the room, put it back together before I returned to work. I'm a little late to the party but here as goes. I had a grade 1/2 class last year and one student had diabetes. Let's call him Adam. So Adam had a cell phone that beeps when his blood sugar is too low high. It's connected to the monitor in his arm hip. The cell phone has no other uses. No apps. No data. Not connected to the school Wi-Fi. The substitute saw his phone on his desk and promptly took it away as per the no devices rule. During gym class an EA comes in to make sure everything is okay, and Adam is visibly ill. Pale, sweating, the whole works. Luckily the CA knows Adam's medical plan. Instantly asks the Adam for the phone and he explains that the substitute took it away in the morning. The EA then loses IT on the substitute demanding the phone. The substitute calls in the principal to reprimand the EA. Then get reprimanded herself as obviously she did not read the student's safety plans. She was asked to leave and the principal taught the class the rest of the day. Adam was fine. Drank a couple juice boxes and had a granola bar. Mum picked him up shortly after. Back when I was a teacher, I had a sub decide my plans weren't good enough for her and went rogue. She decided to show my students videos of animals giving birth on YouTube. I taught English. Not a teacher but in 9th grade my algebra teacher had her baby early in the year so she was gone till the last month or 2 months of the school year. The sub was a former teacher so you'd think she'd be a great sub. Nope. She hyper-focused on 3-4 out of the 28 students in the class and just teach them while completely ignoring the rest of us. She'd pass out a worksheet then go to her students and never acknowledge us again till she dismissed us. Never checked homework. Never acknowledged us. If anyone outside of her favorite students raised their hand or spoke up they were ignored, etc. Which went about as well as you expected with a bunch of 14-15-year-olds. That class was just wild. The kids who actually stayed in the classroom anyway. It was a mess. I'm actually surprised we weren't reported or visited by the teachers on either side of us for how loud we were. After several months with this lady, the vice principal was walking around randomly checking classrooms and walked into our show algebra class. He lost it, yelled at all of us to sit down and shut up. which she also didn't acknowledge, demanded she leave and sat with us the rest of the period. Never saw her again and had maybe 6-7 different subs after her. 2 weeks after this our regular teacher came back. When she realized we had learned nothing and learned the extent of how useless this lady had been, she started tearing up. I passed the classroom on the way to the bathroom during the next period and saw her sobbing at her desk. A friend of my mom's worked at the central office where they assigned or organized the substitute teachers. That lady was permanently taken off the substitute list. 2 things come to mind. 1. Tell the black children they need to speak more clearly because people think black people are hard to understand. 2. Just sit and play on the phone while class loses its mind. Had a substitute teacher in my high school French class show a movie that was straight up softcore pornography but tried to explain that since it was in French it was artistic. It was equally frustrating because while I wanted to see boobs, I also couldn't stop reading the subtitles because I had to understand what they were saying. The teacher did not come back the next day. Update. I went through all the comments and looked at everyone who suggested what movie it might be and none of those movies were the one shown. This would have been in 2006 and the movie looked maybe late 90s or early 2000s. If I come across it, I will update this thread, but for all I know it could have been a porno in French. Not a teacher, but a student with a story nonetheless. Meet MRS. Hostess. Fake name of V. Every time my 8th grade history teacher was out, MRS. Hostess would usually sub for him. Not sure why, because she subbed other classes too. But all the incidents of note happened when she subbed for history. 1. There happened to be a girl in the class who shared a name with an Irish folk song. Every time MRS. Hostess took attendance, when she got to folk song girl, she sang the whole song. Every time. 2. The history teacher kept candy and snacks in his desk. Lollipops that he'd hand out for correct answers or just because. Some leftover Halloween candy, and the Twinkie. The Twinkie was not an ordinary Twinkie. The Twinkie was an experiment in processed food. This Twinkie was still in its original individual packaging and looked normal at first glance, but was actually 3 years past expiration and rock solid. The history teacher demonstrated this by standing on the Twinkie during one of the first weeks of classes. All said to say, "This is a thoroughly inedible Twinkie." So MRS. Hostess subbed again, and we knew she discovered the lollipop stash because she was openly eating them during class. But it wasn't until the next day that our history teacher opened his desk drawer to find that the Twinkie was gone. This woman ate an expired, solid Twinkie as well as literally all the food candy in the teacher's desk. Not a teacher, but in the 4th grade, our teacher had a baby and was gone for several weeks. The sub we had was an absolute witch. She had no patience for kids. She'd yell at us for stupid, ask us questions and or give us homework that was way above our tiny 4th grade brain levels and then complain and call us stupid when literally none of the kids did well on the work. One girl decided to get smart with her one day and she walks over and slaps the girl hard across the face, which of course sends the girl into a hysterical sobbing fit and says that's what your whore of a mother should be doing more often. Being tiny, adorable 4th graders, we were all too afraid to tell anyone. We had to deal with that for 3 weeks until the main teacher came back. My 9th grade English teacher was fired, which is an entire other story, and the school had difficulty finding someone to fill the spot. We would have random subs, but they didn't really teach us. So eventually we had a different person babysit us each day or week. One time it was the very scary principal who just glared at us like we were convicts about to escape. The school's police officers who at least talked to us, and various teachers for one-day stints. I don't know why one of our 5 librarians couldn't have been in there going through grade appropriate books at the least. We spent 2-3 months like that. Had a sub who somehow allowed a last period class of freshmen to convince him that they were not supposed to be working on the packet that I left for the class, and which every other class that day had been working on, because they had already finished it, and told him they were supposed to be watching a movie. He went to the library to get the movie, leaving the class unattended, which promptly then broke out a dance party involving dancing on the desks. My department chair's classroom was next door, but as she taught AP government to seniors, she was able to leave them to come next door and try to figure out what the hell was going on. No sub, He calmed the class down and into the seats and into the worksheets, and calls the principal, who met the sub on his way back from the library and told him he could go home. My chair also found it would be appropriate to basically call me and blame me for this while I was sick at home. I don't teach anymore lol. I mean, packets were not a great emergency sub plan, but what can you do? They could have played heads up 7-up for all I cared lol. They were a handful of a group on the best days. Freshmen after lunch during last period of the day are a situation. I had a cool Chinese lucky cat that went missing after I had a sub. My students said the sub seemed really intrigued by it, talked about it several times, and even moved it from the shelf where it sat and brought it over to my desk. It was gone when I returned the next day. I had left out overnight eggs that I was going to use in a science experiment the following day. I was out and thought nothing about it. I returned the following day and went looking for the eggs only to find them missing. Asked a student where they went and I was informed that the substitute took the class to the special education kitchen, hard-boiled them and ate them. I went to talk to my AP and was informed that the sub had called in sick for her job for that day, due to food poisoning. Not a teacher, but we had a sub for our science class. She didn't believe in science but pseudosciences, was sexist to males, and because of her weird diet would rip loud sulfur smelling farts all the time. Then get mad if we brought it up despite being fed new age hippie bullet and being crop dusted. She also was a horrible sex ed teacher because she said women can choose when to have periods without birth control. Not a teacher, but I participate in STEM programs a lot. In the 90s I belonged to a club that refurbished old industrial PCs and donated them to schools. Sometimes we'd get completely burned out motherboards or disk drives, so I took a bunch of those and made displays showing the insides of computers. And I let the kids explore them as part of my session. Then I'd dig out a couple of blown PCs and monitors, hand out the screwdrivers and let them rip them apart. Yes, I was always careful around the old tube monitors. Once they were done I'd let them pick apart if they wanted to take home. The younger kids especially loved this. And frequently I'd see some kids take home a hard drive controller or a graphics card like it was a real treasure. I even made the local news with my program. That's the thing about living in a small city. Eventually everyone makes the news. So one day I went in to do my lesson at a high school, I think freshman or sophomore science class. The class had a substitute and I had an apt right after that session. So I told them I'd come back to pick everything up the next day. The kids could take whatever they wanted from the old PCs, but please put my displays aside, in the cupboard. Next day I came by and all my displays were still out and they were completely trashed. Worse yet, the sub's attitude was, well, kids will be kids. That was the last session I did, ever, for that program. Not a teacher, but I vividly remember one incident of having a substitute in kindergarten. I had an infected cut on my toe and had been prescribed an antibiotic. That morning was the first time I took it. We were sitting on the floor for roll call and I remember this burning pain in my abdomen. And she told us to get up and go to out desks. I tried to get up only to realize I couldn't move and just laid back. This sub was a total cow and I remember she was always really mean. Anyway, she starts yelling at me for being attention seeking and basically tries to pull me up. I'm in so much pain I start screaming and one of the teachers from the classroom next to ours comes, realizes I'm not faking it and calls an ambulance. Long story short, I'm horribly allergic to penicillin and my kidneys were failing. I was in hospital for almost a week before I got discharged. Needless to say that absolute itch was not allowed back at the school. But I will never forget that day. I had a sub give out my cell phone number to my high school students so they could call me and give me excuses as to why they weren't taking their test while I was gone. I was livid. I complained to the sub office, and that teacher never subbed for my building again. Not a teacher, but I know this was a disaster for my teacher. We had been studying Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story and our teacher had created a very comprehensive exam where we would be asked to compare and contrast characters, situations, and themes of the two as answers to some very specific questions. He had spent countless hours ensuring that it was fair and complete. We were going to have the exam the following Monday and he was taking Friday off. So he told us that in addition to the weekend, we should also use Friday's class to prepare for the exam. His instructions to the substitutes were likely something like, "Tell them to prepare for the exam. They already know what to do." She marched in and shouted, "Prepare for an exam," and proceeded to hand it out. Of course, we protested. But what substitute hasn't heard? We're not supposed to get the exam today from a class at one time or another. When Monday came, the teacher was devastated. He could not count the scores. He wouldn't even attempt to grade it. He did not feel right giving the exam now that we had seen it. All the work he put into it and all the insights he suspected he might gain from scoring it were lost. Instead, we spent the day reviewing what we could have, should have, would have answered. As you can tell, I could really feel his pain. Not a teacher, but in elementary school I had a bloody nose during class and asked to use the restroom. She said no and refused to let me go to the restroom. I think she didn't believe me. I sat there until the blood had spilled all over the desk, then raised my bloody hand to be excused, and only then did she allow me to go clean myself up. She even had the audacity to ask me why I didn't ask to be excused earlier, which was a complete lie, as she definitely heard me the first time, and even the other students pointed out that my nose was bleeding. When the teacher returned, she was livid about what happened. I believe she complained to the administration to make sure the sub was never hired again. Not a teacher, but in 7th grade life science we had a sub. For the first 5 or so minutes of class he made us do a Kahoot. For anyone who doesn't know, Kahoot is a learning website that lets you take a quiz in a fun way. The only problem was that he told us every answer. Next we were supposed to be learning about parts of a microscope, but instead he got them out and told us to mess around with them, and he broke one of them. After that he put a video up and ate my teacher's chocolate, then fell asleep for the last half hour or so of class. Needless to say, when our teacher got back and we told her about the sub, he was fired. He yelled at one of the only girls in my high school engineering class, saying girls don't belong in engineering. He also kicked his feet up on the desk and read the paper the entire day. He banged a yardstick on a desk to get everyone's attention, then pointed it at the whiteboards with the daily objectives, without saying a word. He disappeared at lunch and came back smelling like weed. These are all reports I got from my students the next day. This guy was a retired teacher, too. Was a student. Our maths teacher went on leave for a while, I think maternity, and the supply teacher was absolutely useless. He'd been given one topic to teach us and that was it, for weeks. We had a whole textbook to be working through and I was gunning to take my maths GCSE a year early, but no, we just did a topic our class had got the hang of in a week, for 2 or 3 months, because I guess he didn't know or bother to ask what we were supposed to be doing next. So the rest of the year we had to go ahead of the pace we were expecting to be able to cover everything we had to know, ducking supply teachers. I've had so many bad subs. One sub made an elementary student cry, insisting her own name was misspelled, and made her stand up in front of the class and admit her name was spelled wrong. I asked that she not return, but I still saw her around as other teachers had her sub. Another one worth mentioning was supposed to be my sub for the last 2 weeks of school because I went on maternity leave. This time teaching at a 7th 12th grade school. Ignored all my sub plans. Played on his cell phone the whole time. And then like 3 days in got upset at the students and told them off. And then they watched as he walked out to the parking lot and drove away. Thank goodness some kids went and told the office. When I came back it was like my room had been ransacked. It was awful. We legit do not use subs at my school. There are teaching assistants from pre-K kindergarten who will cover in a pinch. But more often than that, we just divide the kids up amongst the other teachers. Because yes, it is easier to handle 6 or 7 extra kids for a day than to pick up the pieces after a sub has blown through town. Student here. TLDR. Sub demanded I turn over my heart monitor in front of the class. Junior year I was having major heart problems and had to wear a heart monitor 15 hours a day. It had a phone attached that when I had heart murmurs, it would send the data to my doctor. I was wearing it and started having heart issues. It buzzed and I went to click send when the sub demanded I turn over my cell phone. I started to explain why I couldn't and she snapped at me, so I lifted my shirt to show the wires and sensors strapped to my chest. In front of the class of 50 students. Choir class. I've never seen anyone's face drop that fast in my life. He peed in my desk chair. Swear. 2. Got. He apparently peed in my chair and the students noticed it and mentioned it to him. He ignored them and just sat there anyway with a huge puddle of urine on the floor. The kids called security on him. I came in the next day and sat in the chair. It was wet and about that time a security guard stuck her head in the door and said, "Don't sit there. That guy peed in your chair." Went to sleep for 1.5 hours. My class was freaking amazing, the sweetest, most thoughtful group I've ever had. When I got back the next day, I asked how the sub was. Me. How was the sub? Them. He was fine. He kinda took a nap for a while. Me. What? What did you guys do? Them. Worked quietly so that we wouldn't wake him up. Eventually we ran out of work, so we just had silent reading. Me. For how long? Them. From when we started working until it was time to go outside. Me. That's a really long time. Look, I am glad that you guys were so thoughtful, but if something like that ever happens again, please wake the sub up. It's not safe for the sub to sleep. He needed to be awake in case something happened. Them. We would have woken him up if we really needed to, but we also figured he probably really needed the sleep. Seriously, the sweetest class ever. Set an essay to try and hint to my students that I might be a werewolf. I'm not a teacher, but our substitute teacher gave us a task to write a story about any theme we liked. 4th grade, age 10-11. At the moment I was hooked on everything space related. The planets, the moon landing act, too young to even remotely understand any of that. But this didn't hinder me to write a story about Apollo 11. I put my back into it and talked my father into typing it on the computer. Since I would have taken 3 days for that one page. Filled with pride, I gave the story to the substitute teacher and I got it handed back with a line across the paper, stating that I didn't wrote that. No questions or anything, just a "you didn't do this." I know that any form of trying to convince her failed, albeit that no adult person would write even remotely amateurish like I did.